30?
3.
Two or three master's degrees.
It was just always about how smart he was and how he didn't want to marry his wife, but God made him.
Yeah, it's like my wife
What?
was to me and
Weird.
said,
God
God tell me to marry you.
Yeah, it was
That's weird.
super weird.
All right,
It was a weird one.
Mr. Johnny.
Yeah.
Bills to give us? Yeah. That's so cool. I was like, is this like every Hebrew that's done?
Glad you could make it. Okay, Johnny,
Yes.
tell us who your listeners are. What is the context that we have? All right.
Moody Bible Institute students.
Nah.
I know you don't like it, but
I hate
it's
it.
who I'm really preaching to
Not
right
them,
now.
just it.
I can change when I change. If I'm in the church context, I'll preach in a church context.
All
Right
right.
now I'm preaching to you guys.
So let's evaluate him like a Moody Bible Institute student would. All right.
You're not holding
Seat
the
up?
physical Bible in your hand right now.
Yeah. Do you even believe what
What's
text
your
is
middle
that?
name?
It's
Why do you
ESV.
need your-
Are you visiting? What translation?
Interlinear ESV.
It's not the Greek.
It's
Is
Oh,
he
boy.
linear?
Use Greek only.
Interlinear with what?
Even in the Old Testament.
Last name's Wick.
yeah.
Use Greek or
No, future ministry.
All right, sir. Well, we look forward to hearing from you. So whenever you're ready.
Somebody ready to pray real quick?
Sure.
Then start my
Oh,
time.
you want us to?
Lord, thank you for this day and for just for getting us all here. Thank you for another opportunity to hear your word. God, I pray that you would move through John, that you would speak to us, each one of us, Lord. I just pray that you be with us, you be in the things that he says, you be in our hearts, you engage in your word. In your holy name, we praise you and we thank you.
Step 1 is important. Step 1 is vital in whatever endeavor you're starting out to do. For instance, I work as a photo booth operator. And steps are very important when you're operating a photo booth. It's kind of an autonomous thing that you do. Let me explain. So a Moody alumni came to me and said, you can make really good money occasionally working this photo booth. And so I said, yeah, sign me up. I want to do that. So he took me out to, actually it was a Mother's Day service at a church, and he taught me how to operate the photo booth, set it up, taught me all of the details and stuff, and I learned how to set up this photo booth. And now every once in a while I get a text from him giving me a date and a time and saying, are you available to operate a photo booth? And I can either go yes or no. That's step number 1 right there, kind of. And then I get a location and I map out my directions to get there, figuring out how long it'll take. Sometimes it's an hour and a half away, sometimes it's 15 minutes away from school. Step 2 is I dress up, get in my car, and go to a spooky old warehouse where the photo booth equipment is stored. And I travel up in this rickety elevator to the 6th floor, and I take a trundle and I get crates and props and pipes and printers and computer paper and backdrops, and I take it all into the elevator and I load it down into my car, and then I drive to the venue. Now the step that you need to do when you get to the venue is you need to find a place to park. Now sometimes in the city that's really tricky. So you drive around for a little bit and you try to find a place to park. Once you find a place to park, you unload your stuff and you carry it to the venue very carefully because you don't want anything stolen in the meantime and in between time. Then you walk into the venue, you find the event coordinator, the wedding planner, whoever it is. They don't have time for you, but you've got to say real quick, hey, I'm here with photo booth stuff. Where do you want me to set up? And they'll give you a location, and then you become the sneakiest moving company in the world as you move in the photo crates and the huge boxes and the big backdrops and props and everything. And then the last step is you unload all of the equipment and you freak out. Because you realized, if you're me, that way back when you were trained in how to set up the photo booth, you weren't really paying attention. You weren't really listening that well. So now you're in a kind of an upscale part of town in a high-end restaurant, and the wedding reception is about to start, and you have equipment strewn all over the floor, and you have to put it together really quick, and you have no idea how to. Why? Because you missed step 1. You didn't understand in the beginning. You didn't really learn, you didn't really listen in the beginning. And I think the same thing goes for us as people who want to go into ministry. If you want to have a God-glorifying, a God-honoring leadership role in ministry, there is an important step one, and that is gaining wisdom and understanding from God. And I think this is proven in scriptures. So if you'll turn with me in the text to 1 Kings chapter 3, that's where we're going to be camped out today. Step one to a God-honoring, God-glorifying leadership position in ministry is seeking his wisdom, hearing from him. So as you take out your Bibles, I'll explain the text. The last phrase in chapter 2 of 1 Kings kind of summarizes where we are right now. So the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. 1 Kings starts out, there's kind of a contentious relationship in the court. People are vying for power. As David gets older, he wants to set up his son Solomon as king, and so he does that. There is some opposition, there is some drama in the court, but Solomon is placed in the kingly role. Chapter 2, he consolidates power. He gets rid of some of his opposition. In chapter 3, he's starting out. He's beginning his time as the king of Israel. This is his start. This is his starting block. This is his step one. We're going to look together at the text and see what he does. Because remember, step one is seeking God and godly wisdom. And we're going to see what King Solomon does and see kind of a turning point for him in his time in leadership. So if you'll read with me just through to verse 4. We're going to read through to verse 4 first because I want to keep the tension in the text, and there's a lot to unpack in the first 4 verses of chapter 3. I'll read aloud. Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. And the people were sacrificing in the high places, however, because there was no house yet built in the name of the Lord. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father, only he sacrificed and made offerings at the high places. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. Now let's stop there real quick because there's a lot of context to unpack. These are Solomon's first 2 steps. What are they? Marry the Egyptian princess and offer a lavish, extravagant sacrifice, 1,000 burnt offerings. These are his first steps. He is instituted as king, and they're really shrewd, wise steps to take. He marries the daughter of Pharaoh, and if you know anything about Egypt in ancient times, it was a powerhouse of a civilization. Militarily, economically, agriculturally, they traded, their culture was diffused throughout the known world at that time. And so Solomon sees this marriage bid on the table and he takes it up. Not only does he take it up, but he takes that daughter into his kingdom. And this is important too, because remember, the walls aren't set up, his house isn't built, the temple isn't complete. And so when he brings her in, he's bringing a very influential political figure into his kingdom. So if anybody's going to attack Jerusalem, in a sense, they're also attacking Egypt. This is a shrewd move by King Solomon. He's hedging his bets. He's getting ready to start his time as leader. He also offers 1,000 sacrifices at Gibeon. 1,000 sacrifices. That's huge. That's a gratuitous amount of blood. Can you picture it? And he does that in order to appease and be religiously right. Because he loves the Lord and he's walking in the ways of his father. David did it, I do it. And so, as an outsider looking in, these are smart first moves for King Solomon. But I want to introduce to you what a Israelite would think, looking at Solomon's first 2 moves as king. First of all, Egypt, if you know anything about Egypt and Israel's relationship, they weren't always on the best terms. Matter of fact, there's this whole book of the Bible, comes after Genesis. It's called Exodus, as in we're going to exodus land of Egypt. because they've enslaved the people of Israel. So in the mind of an Israelite, you might look at him bringing this daughter of Pharaoh into the very heart of his kingdom, into the very center of God's kingdom on earth, and say, Solomon, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? It was kind of a red flag for an early reader of this text. And the same thing goes for Gibeon and the high place. See, if you were to read through the rest of 1st and 2nd Kings, you would find out that high places were kind of a contentious deal in the life of early Israel. They were places where kings could go and offer sacrifices to pagan gods. And Gibeon, especially, the great high place, we know, because we're Bible students, that in 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 2, it is a heart of pagan worship. The Gibeonites still live there, and the Amorites still live there in this place. And so he's offering 1,000 burnt sacrifices on this pagan altar. Fascinating. And I think that's important for us as future ministry leaders. These shrewd moves that Solomon makes are important for us to see, because on the outside looking in, they look like smart choices, right? They look like maybe the right thing to do. But I think that there are things that even we today in our ministries that we can do that might look economically viable, socially, they might put us in places of prominence, politically, they might be the right thing to do, and yet they might actually place us in opposition to the will of God. They might actually place us in opposition to the will of God. Things that we can do even in our own ministries that look great from the outside. And as we continue on this text, I'll explain how that is. Verse 5, I just want to emphasize, I'll read it real quick. At Gibeon, after he sacrificed 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar, at Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And the Lord said, whatever you ask, I will give you. This is interesting. This is interesting just because of the way that God says it. Whatever you ask, I'll give you. Whatever you ask, just name your thing, and I'm going to give it to you. And Solomon gets to ask for whatever he wants. I think in the mind of an ancient Israelite reader, this could be a red flag too. Why is God saying just ask for something? He doesn't say just ask for something. And so essentially, Solomon is given this blank check of blessing. And he says, God says, whatever you want in the memo line, that's what we'll put there. What do you want? In our own ministries in life, let's say, imagine with me, you graduate from the Moody Bible Institute someday. Imagine. And you've been placed in a leadership role in some sort of ministry. Maybe it's just a youth group. Maybe it's a division of a parachurch organization. Maybe you're doing campus ministry someplace. Maybe you're operating in a church plant. You've been given some authority. You've been given a position of power. And one day you're in a local coffee shop working on a message, working on some emails, whatever it is, and an instant message pops up in the corner of the screen, and it's from God. And God says, hey, I see you're doing this ministry thing. I'm proud of you, my good and faithful servant. I'm looking for a way to bless you. What would you write in the memo line for a blessing? You know, I think for me, like immediately when I hold a check in my hand, I think like money. That would be a great first blessing for ministry. Imagine, and you're asking God for money too. So it's not like God, I need next month's rent. God, I want extravagant wealth to do your will. Imagine what you could do with that money. The missionaries you could send. You could even start a lobby in Congress to pass, more godly legislation. You could set up huge monuments. You could develop Bible software. You could start institutions training up people in the ways of the Lord, if that's the blessing that you decide to ask for. That's not a bad thing, right? Or you could say, you know what, God? I'll go back even. I don't want to have a single enemy in ministry. I don't want a single enemy in my ministry. I want to be a charismatic personality. I want to win people over, because what is funding if I can win over billionaires, right? Like that right there. It's made. I want to preach the gospel well. I want to have a good heart that people can see, and I want great conversion. I don't want a single enemy in my entire ministry. I want to be able to preach and win people to the gospel and grow people in their faith. That's not necessarily a bad thing to ask for either. What would you ask for if you were given this blank check of blessing? What does Solomon say when he's given this blank check of blessing? Ask what I shall give you. And Solomon said, you've shown great and steadfast love to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father. Although I am but a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to number or be counted for the multitude. Stop right there real quick. Don't read any further, because I love this little preface that Solomon, this little confession that Solomon gives to God in prayer in his dream. He says, God, I don't know if you can tell, like maybe the ancient Israelite reader could tell, but I have no idea what I'm doing. You've placed me in this position of leadership, and I'm in charge of all of your people, God, and I'm a little child here. I'm a little child in this place. And he sees something about this check of blessings. He could ask for that wealth, but how does a little child use wealth? I remember one time when I was really little, I was walking into Kmart with my mom, and I found a $20 bill on the ground. You know what I did with that? I didn't steward it wisely. I didn't save it for the Lord's kingdom. I went in and I bought Pokemon cards immediately. And Solomon knows how young children use their popularity, use their charisma. They can be mean to each other, can't they? They can be awful. And so Solomon's saying, listen, God, I'm a small child. More than anything that I need, I have no idea what I'm doing. I might have made missteps already. God, give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this, your great people? Solomon asks for an understanding mind. What does he ask God to give him? An understanding mind. Now, this is a really interesting thing to ask for, and I think the ESV does a good job of explaining it with understanding mind, but I also, without boring you with Hebrew technicalities, want to break down some of the other ways that this phrase is translated by Bible translators. He asks for an understanding mind, or it's translated a discerning heart, or even more literally, a God listening heart. He wants to hear from God because he has no idea where to begin. And quite frankly, he's already begun. So now he needs to hear from God. Step one to a God-honoring, God-glorifying leadership position in ministry is hearing from God himself, gaining his wisdom, his insight, having a hearing heart. It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. Notice he didn't say that he was pleased with the 1,000 burnt offerings. Only after he came to him, and only after he asked, Solomon, what's your heart here? What do you want? I'll give it to you. Does God say that he was pleased? It pleased the Lord that Solomon asked this. And God said to him, because you have asked for this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding and discernment what is right. Behold, I now give according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall arise after you. I will give you also what you didn't ask for, both riches and honor, so that no king shall compare to you on all of your days. And if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes, my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. See, in this, Solomon sought first God's heart. He asked for a God-listening heart. And God said, if you seek me first, if you seek my kingdom first, all the other stuff I'll add on to you. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? And I think in that there's wisdom, because, I mean, you could have worldly wealth. You could have, a fruitful ministry. But unless those things are placed behind step one, hearing from God himself, you could go all sorts of different directions. That's attested to in this very text. Look at his step one and step two. Sacrifices at Gibeon, marries the daughter of the Egyptian Pharaoh. These are not necessarily smart moves. You can tell that because Solomon changes his way. As soon as he's done getting this wisdom, verse 15, Solomon awoke and behold, it was a dream. Then he came to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and offered up a burnt offering and peace offerings, and made a feast for all of his servants. He changes his ways once he's given this wisdom from the Lord. He doesn't sacrifice at Gibeon anymore. He goes to the Ark of the Covenant where he's supposed to sacrifice, and sacrifices there in that place instead. So as we go out into our ministries, which I pray that we all do someday, I pray that we seek first as our step one a heart and a mind for God, wisdom from the Lord, discernment from him, because you can have all of this stuff and be Egypt. You can be a religious person and be sacrificing at Gibeon. What you need first and foremost is an understanding mind, is a discerning mind, is a God-listening heart. And I think there's also, as I close, a warning in this text. Because notice how he does change where he goes and sacrifices as unto the Lord. But he doesn't get rid of his Egyptian wife. And that one step, that first step that Solomon took, ultimately became his downfall, because he added more foreign wives to his life. And it says that in the end, Solomon's foreign wives turned his heart towards pagan idols and false gods, and turned him away from where he was supposed to be. So as we close, ask yourself in your own mind, where are you tempted to go before you seek the wisdom of the Lord? Is it fundraising? Is it skills like preaching? Where do you go? Is it the relationships and the church politics that you can get involved with? Where do you go? How do you hedge your bets that are not first and foremost seeking the mind of God? Because these are not bad things, but unless they're placed within the discerning hands of God, they'll lead to your downfall. And I solemnly and firmly believe, that God will grant you this wisdom too if you ask for it. If you are still enough and silent enough to ask the Lord for wisdom, I believe that his still small voice can become deafening. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you so much for this time together. Thank you for this time that we could come and seek your will in your word. I pray that we place seeking after you in your heart. I pray that we make that step one in our lives, and that we trust that in that seeking and in that understanding of your will for us, you'll give us step 2, you'll give us step 3, you'll give us step 4. God, you will lay those things out if we come to you and ask for wisdom. So I pray that we do that well, and I pray that we do that as we move forward into our ministries. In your name I pray, amen.
All right, thanks, Johnny. Give us just a moment. Give you your seat back. You there?
It's Grace's. It's Grace's seat. I stole hers.
Hobby Lobby.
Church. Perks of having a children's ministry director for mother. That's right.
Whenever you want good sermon illustrations, visual aids, just go to the
Children's ministry.
children's ministry closet and find good stuff in there. What's your box number?
891.
All right. Let y'all keep filling your forms out there. Johnny, how are you feeling? What's
Good.
your feedback for yourself?
I think the biggest thing on this one, because it was just following the text, so it was easier for me to just remember what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
Would be not belaboring certain points, or like expounding on them longer than I should have. And then the other thing is like structurally, like when to like reveal certain turnkey like perspectives on the text.
Yeah.
Would be the other thing that I want to
Yeah.
back on.
Okay.
Yes.
Cool. Well, I mean, that is the advantage of sticking with one passage of scripture, right?
Yeah.
Is where do I go next? Just go to the next verse, right? Seriously, I don't think that getting lost is that easy to do, because
Yeah.
if you just, I'm going to start with my introduction, I'm going to raise needs, then we're going to go to the text, I'm going to walk you through the text,
Yeah.
and then I'm going to conclude by telling you, just summarize it, and then here's how we can get out of here,
Yeah.
essentially. Now, I understand if sometimes we forget things, like an illustration, or forget, an application within the text or something like that, but you should, if you just stick with that sort of structure there of introduction, go through the text, body, it typically is easy to follow, and your listeners are easy. They'll thank you for it because they
Yeah.
can follow it too. Where it gets tricky, right? I'm not saying you did this. I'm thankful that you didn't do it. But when you start with the text, and then you start with an idea, and then you go to another text, and you have a story, and then you have another text and an idea that you want to, well, I really want to talk about this, and then I'm going to come somehow full circle, and then end. I mean, that is confusing, right? But if you're, no, introduction, here's my text, here's the conclusion,
Yeah.
you're safe. So, good. All right. What feedback can we give John? We gave him feedback on Friday for his other sermon. That
Yeah,
was feed
thank
forward.
you so much.
Let's give him feedback on this one. Yeah, I always love feed forward. So we do that when I was pastoring.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned that in this class. Like we would meet every week and talk about the upcoming Sunday, well, the previous Sunday, the upcoming Sunday, and then the 2 Sundays away. And sometimes we'd even plan bigger ones. But yeah, so that's feed forward. Let's give feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think you expounded too much
Okay.
on various points.
Huh.
I thought it was a very comfortable amount.
Yeah.
of expounding. I picked a great text, a great multi-sensory tool. I thought this was a really well balanced sermon.
Yeah.
I couldn't offer any more critique.
Yeah, and it is a text that, granted, is for Moody students, but still, I don't think Moody students would be that familiar with it, right? It's not like Noah's Ark or, what's that?
Something big.
Yeah, something. Yeah, Jesus feeding the 5,000. It's not, something like that. Something a little obscure. So, yeah, good. Okay, what else? Remember, Moody student audience. Make you pay for that.
I honestly thought it was just fantastic. Like, I didn't see any really big weaknesses that I think were threats to how you were preaching, or the general message you got across. I'm sure Professor has some things to say, but like, I enjoyed it, and I not only enjoyed it, but I got something from it. It was clear, and it was a fun experience.
Good.
10 out of 10.
Great. Caleb, yeah.
My favorite thing about your sermons is that you don't have clutter.
Yeah.
Like I wish I could
Yeah.
preach that way. Like everything you say is just very intentional. And do you manuscript them, or like how do you speak so intentionally? Like when
Did you
I
write a
speak-
manuscript for the sermon?
I wrote a manuscript. It's not all of this because of Sunday's text. Like this one was a super fast turnaround for me.
Yeah.
So my manuscript is it's weaker than it normally is. But yeah, usually I manuscript it or to certain.
Okay. And is your speaking in clarity, is that just like your personality and how you speak? Or
I-
is that like do you do that intentionally?
Yeah, I mean it kind of comes together in rehearsal. So like my first run through of any sermon will usually be like 40 minutes long because I'll say like everything, and then I'll like chop that down just verbally. Like okay, like I can say that in this many words. I think.
Do you write that, or do you just do it mentally? I'm just asking.
This time it was mentally. This time it was all mentally because my manuscript is abysmal. So
Mhm.
that's just what it is this time. But yeah, usually, and I did like theater in high school, so I think just like holding
Hmm.
in my brain is easier. But Yeah, so yeah, I talk, but I think one of the big things for me is talking through it. So like talking through it and then being like, okay, this is 40 minutes, how do I get it down to this many minutes? Because usually I will belabor the point on the first couple of run-throughs, and then I get it more concise. And I pick phrases that I use, that I like to keep,
Yeah.
you know? So, I'm trying to think of an example of that.
And you just shave as much as you can.
Yeah, exactly. Cause the first time I go through, it's just like, and there's this thing about Gibeon, and then you explain like everything about Gibeon. So, like for me, one of the big things was, will I just say that it's a pagan place, or will I actually cite the verse where it says like, in the time of David, it's a pagan place? And so, because it was to Moody students, I kept that in, but like that's something that like, you know, I could have cited that scripture and read it to you guys. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in some sense, it's like Statue of David, right, with Leonardo da Vinci, right?
Yeah.
I think it was the Statue of David. When they say like, how do you know what to take off and what to leave? He's like, well, I just take off everything that's not David, right? Or so it's in there. You just have to shave off what is not necessary,
Yeah.
and that's what the sermon is, right? You have your 40 minutes, 50 minutes. And honestly, I think some people who preach for 40, 50 minutes, they could do just as good a job in 30 minutes. They just, you know, haven't taken the time to shave it off. So, yeah. Grayson, yes.
3 things, Jonathan. The first one, I really like the blank check of blessing. I thought that was a really good way of describing like what's happening here.
Yes.
Like that was very memorable for me. I'm gonna steal that in the future.
Okay, can I add a critique so that when you
Yes.
steal it, you just go ahead and put on there to Solomon from God or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
I thought that was really well done. That would have made it better. And then I think that your central idea could have been slightly more clear because you had like a few like different iterations of it.
Yeah.
So I think sticking with one and saying it more, and then it was a little bit long because you're like, there was like a preface of like as future ministry leader something. Step 1 is hearing from the Lord.
Yeah.
So I think maybe just wordsmithing that would be helpful.
Yeah.
And then you walk through the first 2 steps of Solomon when you're walking through the text. You're like, this is step 1, this is step 2, and then you didn't really pick up with like, okay, here's 3, and like, I think that might have been a helpful way of explaining. Yeah.
Yeah, because was step 1,
Step 1 was supposed to be seek after the Lord.
okay,
But
but instead it was marrying.
Mary
Egyptian.
Egyptian,
Okay.
and I think, yeah. So I just tried to, so just for clarity and my own sake, I just tried to do what the text said in that order.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So that's kind of mechanically what I was wrestling with before I came in.
Okay.
That kind of idea.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I think you could like go through and be like, okay, here's his steps, but
Do you
here's
need
what
the
your
steps?
first
Should.
step should
Exactly.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you need the steps? Or what is this? What is the point of?
Yeah,
Just to show that,
Or just begin with
yeah,
the language of step, maybe
get rid of those. This step
the
language.
foundation of our ministry is seeking wisdom from God or
Yeah.
asking God for discernment.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Mark,
Good.
then we'll go to bed.
I just, this was, first of all, another excellent sermon. Every sermon I've seen you preach, from the time you were in Dr. Morse's class to now, has been phenomenal. So seriously, like, hear that. I had a question though. Did you feel like, how did you feel about delivering this sermon to us? I mean, like, as far as like, did you feel like you were a peer-to-peer thing? Did you feel like coming underneath us? Or did you feel like maybe stepping over us?
No, I felt like a I think peer-to-peer was how I programmed it, or tried to program it.
The only reason I bring it up
Yeah.
is just, and it might have just been me.
Yeah.
I mean, it might have just been me maybe where I'm at with my headspace today. But it seemed like a lot of the times when I've heard you preach that like one of the best things about listening to you talk is how like, I mean, there's always been this like serious air of like humility when you speak and present.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like maybe in the tone, again, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not saying, just hear me, I'm saying like you have an excellent sermon, but just in the tone it seemed maybe, and then again, it might have just been me, like there was a little bit of like coming at us from a top-down type perspective.
Absolutely.
Um,
That's a great point, and
Might have just been me.
that's one of the reasons why I don't think that the Moody audience is particularly gonna be beneficial for you as students because you're talking at a peer-to-peer level, right?
Yeah.
And just the concept of preaching, the preacher has authority, right? But who's given you that authority? Okay, God has, but also the congregation typically does too.
Yeah.
This congregation has not given you authority because you're not,
Yeah.
you haven't earned it. We didn't hire you, right? So,
Yeah.
and then where it comes into play is because one of my suggestions was, okay, we talked about seeking wisdom and listening to God and discernment, and that was really good. And so we got into that, and you may have touched on this, and I may have missed it. But then the question is, okay, well, what does that look like?
Yeah.
What does discernment mean?
Yeah.
We think we know what it means, but do we really? What does listening to God mean?
Yeah.
The only reason I say this is because I took a class on listen, learn, and decide, or something. Listen, discern, and decide. Yeah, listen, discern, and decide. So we walk through steps of how to actually listen to ourselves, to others, to God. Discernment, what does that mean? So there's a difference between listening and discerning, and between wisdom and so what does that look like? And then I think to build tension for your students, so if you were to do it as a Moody student, is you can give more scenarios where this is actually going to be important.
Yeah.
So for instance, when you get into ministry and so-and-so's parents come to you and say, my daughter says that she's attracted to other girls, what do you do?
Yeah.
Or when you go into ministry and you say that my husband is addicted to such and such, but I know that I'm supposed to stay with him, but it's detrimental to our marriage. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Right? And that's why it's challenging because we haven't been in those scenarios, right? As student, I mean, you may have, if you've been a pastor for a while, maybe you've seen some of these scenarios, or if your background has captured that, then you could be able to communicate that to Moody students. So I think giving more of those scenarios helps us to understand the difference between listening and discernment, and then that brings more of the application to life. Because I think the textual part, I think you did fantastic. I thought you walked us through the text, you told us what was important, you did a great job of, even the different uses of the translations, although I think you should use an NIV, ESV.
That wasn't our view.
I know. The funny thing is a couple times in this class, sometimes in Communication Biblical Truth, where people use ESV, they'll read it and then they'll say, but probably a better translation for this is, and then they'll say it, and that's exactly what the NIV translates.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, exactly. Right, discerning heart.
Discerning. Well, the big one was God hearing heart. That's what my commentary
That's
said.
probably
Eugene Peterson's The Message.
I know.
Yeah.
All the commentaries were
Yeah.
right there with
Yeah.
that.
So, anyways, keep that in mind. I told Ben we'd go to Ben, and then we'll go back to Mark.
Well, as a side note on that, I would always caution us to not say a better translation.
Yeah.
Because I don't want anyone to doubt what
Oh,
the
yeah,
original
good. So
Genesis
just another one,
to
or
say
the NIV
that
says
the
this.
Hebrew, like, nuances.
In the
But-
original language,
but
yeah.
my original comment was on like the step one. The only thing that confused me was that the illustration at the beginning, step one was like receiving the call
Mm-hmm.
and then going on. And
Yeah.
then you said when you couldn't put it together because you didn't follow step one, but you did follow step one.
Yeah.
So I got confused as to what step
Yeah.
one was.
I tried to, because that's always kind of a linchpin where you want them to realize, oh wow, like the actual step one he wasn't doing right.
Yeah.
And so when I said step one is receiving the call, I said sorta.
So,
Because like,
Okay,
because
it wasn't step
because it
one.
wasn't step one, and I didn't
Okay.
want people to key into
Good.
that.
Okay, I
But because like I wanted
You're
to
aware.
hide what real step one was
Okay.
for the end. But and that
Yeah.
was messy language. Like I could have made that better.
I just want to commend this, that was really good. I didn't know what you were gonna do with it. In the introduction, it was just sitting up there. I was like, okay, we're talking about first steps, and there's this thing that's gonna release
Treasure
doves or
chest. Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It's gonna pop out,
Doves with
And then whenever you brought it together in the conclusion, the image was a perfect synopsis of your outline. I felt like.
Yeah.
There was this picture of the gold and all the good things that we can be striving for and everything like that, and yet there's this elevated thing.
Yeah.
And it was the summary of your outline was in the picture.
Yeah.
And for me, that was I'm not gonna forget that, because it's a picture, you
Yeah.
know? And I just thought it was really well done with your creativity, or even if you just took that out of a child's book, it doesn't, it was just well executed. Thank you.
And that captures the multisensory essence, right? And it was obvious that he had rehearsed that, right? It's obvious he practiced, like, how hard do I throw this cup so the coins don't, go all over the room? Where do I put these apples, and what color apples do I put on what side, right? And so it's obvious he thought through that. So I want you to think through it when you use these visual images, because they're so powerful, they're going to be memorable. Maybe last word?
I have a preaching related question, not a critique question.
Yeah. Great.
So, when we are guest speaking at a church, during my internship this summer, the first church I preached at, I felt like I did not have authority to preach there,
Mhm.
and it was very uncomfortable.
Okay.
And it just wasn't, it was weird vibes, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it was a good sermon, like, it was a good sermon, you
Yeah.
know, but it was weird, it was like, anyways.
Yeah.
The second church I preached at, profound effect, much more down-to-earth sermon, but I felt like I had spiritual authority over the church. I don't, even know where that came from or what, paradigm you put that in.
Yeah.
But when you mentioned that, it struck a tone, and I was like, yeah, so
Yeah.
where is the authority in guest speaking, and then do we actually have spiritual authority as people who study the word, or how does that work?
Right.
Theologically?
That's a great question, yeah. Well, I think of a couple things. One is because of our age, at least for most of us, a little bit older than you, but I'm still young when it comes to the church world, right? That we have that obstacle that we have to deal with, right? Or that is one of the elephants in the room, right? Some of it is the church okay with that, right? So the church background, the church history of that, of those people. I think one of the things that can help us, although this is challenging, is how we're actually introduced. And so maybe you won't be able to deal with this, but you can help other people who come up after you, right? And so think about strategically how you can introduce your guest speakers. Because how I would want to be introduced as a guest speaker is somebody who maybe says, to the congregation, they can either talk about my age or not. Like, even though he may look young, he is a phenomenal speaker. He's been a godly man. He's, studied here. He teaches this. I learn a lot from him, and I look forward that you all get to learn from him as well today. So then that just set up helps, you as a speaker. Another thing that one of the pastors we would always do is when we had an intern come to speak, it wasn't just like, oh, and today our intern is speaking. His name's, Colin. So let's welcome Colin. Right? It was, hey, one of the things we're committed at, Southside is to be able to bring up young men, young women into ministry so that the gospel can go on for generations and generations. One of the people that we've invested in is his name is Colin, and you have the joy and the pleasure of being able to listen to him. We've been able to, I was able to hear this sermon earlier this week, and I got a lot out of it. It was phenomenal, and so I'm so glad that he was able to come, or he's able to come, and you're a welcome guest, welcome him as a warm guest, and get an invite to Colin onto the platform right now, So when you have an invitation like that, then people are like, okay, yeah, we're all partakers. We're helping him, in his quest to become a minister or something like that. So I think the introduction helps. Now, if you don't get that, like for instance, not yesterday, but the previous Sunday, I think I mentioned this, I preached at a small church, Tim Sisk's church. He did a great job introducing me, but I just went ahead and talked about how I'm younger than everybody else in the room, right? I just said, so, here's what I do, here's how I teach preaching, we do something a little bit different today. But one of the first questions that many of you have asked from the moment I stood up here was, how old is that guy? And don't you have to be old to be a professor? To which then everybody kind of laughed because Dr. Sisk says yes, I guess so, but somehow I got in, right? So just kind of poking fun at myself, if you will. But what I want to talk to you today about is how people like me, people who are millennials, struggle with the idea that God is still with us. And so that's what I want to talk to you today about. So I just went ahead and then they were interested because they're like, we don't get to hear this that often, right? Yeah, because we hear from other profs who are, people who are not from that generation, which their sermons are fine as well, but I'm like, well, the only thing I can offer you, and I even said that, like, you get to hear wonderful, preachers every week, especially, Pastor Tim. But perhaps the one element that I can help and shed light on is to introduce a conversation or to join the conversation when it comes to people like me who are millennials. Even the name millennial, the title millennial. Some of you cringe when you hear the word millennial. And I get it, I understand, we're some of the most such and such, people in the world, right? But perhaps our conversation today can help you to understand your kids better, your grandkids better, the people you work with, the people you live next to, and why they struggle with the idea that God is still with us, or something like that.
Super raises the need.
Yeah. Okay, but good job, Johnny. Now, I'm supposed to give you all a few minutes to do course evaluations, so do course evaluations, okay? They're helpful. I think if we get 100%, I get like a Joe's gift card or something like that, although we're not gonna get 100%.
It looks like I'm gonna conveniently forget this.
Yeah, I know, right? I know I'm not gonna get a Joe's gift card, so. Good job, Johnny. Let me go get your thumb drive.
Real proud, Jonathan Kalen.
But a company too. Everything's